Operation Iraqi Freedom. A war like no other.
This is shock and horror comedy.
Unprecedented coverage. Extraordinary access.
Get masked.
The NBC News team was there on all fronts, sharing the danger.
4 mortar rounds have just come in here, exploded.
In the skies.
We took fire on the way in.
The grenade wound clearly visible.
And on the ground.
We're in the midst of a just vicious sandstorm.
Bringing America television images live as they were happening for the soldiers on the field.
What do you see out there in the distance?
And their families at home.
We can't leave the television. Every tank, every helicopter, is that my son?
Traveling at the tip of the spear.
Now Baghdad is within striking distance.
And learning a personal lesson about the losses of war. Now the sad news about David Bloom, who has been reporting from the front lines. The men and women of NBC News, first with the images seen and felt around the world. Operation Iraqi Freedom.
They're taking out whole buildings with these cruise missiles.
It was a new kind of war, brought to us by a team of NBC News journalists who were right in the midst of it all, even on the battlefield.
Troops moving up the road. Helicopters now trying to search, see where the fire is coming from.
NBC's comprehensive coverage plan included top military experts to analyze daily events, and correspondents, producers, cameramen, and engineers who fanned out across the Middle East to report on the war from Egypt, Israel, Turkey, Jordan, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, and Kuwait.
I am standing among the foxholes of a number of U.S. Marines. This is where they will eat, sleep, pass the time, possibly even defend themselves until they get the call to go into Iraq. And I tell you, they fully expect to get that call.
Some reporters actually lived with the troops, following their every move from the Kuwait desert north toward Baghdad. It was part of an experiment to change the way wars are covered.
These are the men and women here who will be responsible for any injuries out here on the flight line.
Journalists who were, in the language of the Pentagon, embedded with U.S. forces. Their access was unprecedented.
While battle planning continues here in the 101st Tactical Operations Center, vital gear, including transportation and artillery, is still on a ship that won't be arriving in Kuwait until tomorrow.
I could walk into, and it surprised a lot of soldiers, into the Tactical Operations Center, a tent that is full of classified computer screens. You can see real-time battlefield movement of troops as they move forward.
In a briefing just prior to the war, a group of journalists, all seasoned, kept raising questions. What happens if? Can I shoot that? Can I broadcast? And he would say, yes. What happens if the United States messes up and they lose a lot of soldiers? Can I broadcast that? Yes.
Reporter Tom Aspel was invited to be embedded with the Rangers, one of the most secretive groups in the armed forces.
They emphasize this is the first time we've done this. We're very excited about it. We've never been allowed to take press with us. You're going to see some really interesting things. This was music to our ears. But we understood from early on, we heard rumors that the DoD wasn't happy that somebody was going with the Rangers.
Brian Williams, who was anchoring from Kuwait and filing reports on the Special Forces, got a rare glimpse into another secret world.
These are the men of U.S. Special Operations, and they have never let a camera record these missions until now. They're not like normal soldiers. They're trained under intense conditions. They don't go on normal missions. They live at an airbase here in the Persian Gulf, and this is their ride.
We saw things and were shared things that really were unrepeatable.
We were told often in advance that the Special Forces soldiers we were around would not like a lot of eye contact. We had occasion to see some of the Special Forces troops who were, shall we say, the target assassins.
The ground rules were simple.
As long as you don't give away our position, as long as you don't endanger our soldiers as they move north from the Kuwaiti border, you can say and do what you want to do.
But there was a wariness on both sides of the camera.
There was a serious concern among the U.S. military, and quite frankly, a legitimate concern, that reporters have a tendency to want to give so much information that it could jeopardize the lives of troops.
At this point, you're just waiting for more orders, and you've taken a defensive position, correct?
Yes, that's correct. We started digging in. We're going to take in defensive position right now.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to back ourselves up here so we're not interrupting this Marine's job because he's got a battle to fight there.
They were very nervous about it. One of the lieutenant colonels said, well, why don't we just invite the Iraqi enemy into our planning tent as well?
When they announced the embed system, I thought it would be a crapshoot. Not everybody is going to get in the front with the first guys to get into Baghdad.
Reporting on this war wouldn't be easy. The embeds would have a lot to learn in a short amount of time.
F-18 streaked in, dropped 500 and 1,000-pound bombs on some anti-aircraft guns and also on some old armored troop carriers of Soviet vintage.
I remember feeling like I did when I studied for the bar exam, cramming so much information into my head in such a short period of time about a world that was utterly foreign to me.
They'd also have to live just like the troops, enduring every hardship they did.
I did keep thinking to myself that I'm 42 years old, and 60% of the Marine Corps is under the age of 23, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to be able to keep up with these guys.
Wearing that flak jacket, it weighed a ton. It wasn't designed to be worn 20 hours a day, and this thing was agony.
Then there were the technical challenges.
New York, this is Kerry.
How to get the story out, to transmit the images and sounds of war back home from the middle of a battlefield. The NBC News team relied on satellite phones, video phones that worked through laptop computers, and video uplink dishes.
I have you.
And David Bloom had his own secret weapon, the Bloom-mobile.
How does this work?
Well, suffice it to say it works. How about if we just leave it at that? I mean, basically what we've done is we've established the ability to transmit live from this vehicle using a pretty sophisticated camera, which can be outside the vehicle and take the bumps and the jars.
We were the only people covering the war that could broadcast full broadcast quality video as we're actually moving across the desert.
You've got live images of an army on the move, an army invading another country, and it was powerful footage.
It took a lot of planning and a lot of effort on the part of a lot of people, but obviously in the end, I think we benefit from it, and I hope that our viewers benefit from it, because it certainly is an unprecedented view of American ground troops as they prepare to engage in battle.
Target Iraq. This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
The United States and Great Britain today gave up the idea of winning a second UN resolution authorizing a war against Iraq. So tonight, President Bush will go on national television where he will deliver a final ultimatum to Saddam Hussein. Monday, March 17th, the battle lines were drawn.
Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours. Their refusal to do so will result in military conflict, commenced at a time of our choosing.
It was 4 a.m. local time when Marines here at Camp Shoup gathered around a television to hear the president's speech.
Their refusal to do
We gave them a return feed so they could watch the president's speech. So we all watched it together, and then we realized, oh, this is it.
Today, there is a new sense of urgency among the Marines. They may be headed north. Most training schedules have been called off now. Non-essential equipment is being stored.
Saddam and his sons say they will not leave Iraq American forces on the Iraqi border are on short notice to move out in what now has been officially labeled Operation Iraqi Freedom.
With many here now believing war is imminent, they are fine-tuning their weapons and today mapping out battlefield plans with rocks and sand, key objectives marked by bottles of Tabasco sauce.
At the 101st Forward Air Refueling Point, last-minute zeroing of gun sights on Apache attack helicopters.
More force, more pressure.
And other preparations, too. A class on how to deal with prisoners of war, taught by a New Orleans policeman called up in the reserves. Soldiers of the 101st today, ready to go to war, singing a song from World War II. We have a rendezvous with destiny.
The soldiers would come to dinner in the end when they knew they were going no longer in regular uniform, but they would be sitting at tables in chemical gear. They were given their hand grenades. They don't pass out grenades until the very last second before they go to battle.
It's a somewhat disquieting experience to be so close to Iraq with the frontline troops as they hear their commander-in-chief tell them that war is imminent. But for many of these soldiers who've been here up to 6 months, it was exactly the order they'd been waiting for.
Been sitting there a long time training. This is our job, and I think it's very possible, you know. It's good.
Do you have some trepidation about it?
A little bit. I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, it's fine. Tell me what's going through your mind right now as you're thinking about it.
Just my family, my wife.
Commanders were preparing the troops psychologically for what may lie ahead. Most here have never seen war. Many are teenagers.
It's normal to feel a lot of uncertainty in what we're about ready to do.
As the build-up to war intensified, tension grew in the Kuwait desert. NBC's embeds had become friendly with many of the young soldiers who would soon be heading into harm's way.
We were with about 900 men, mainly men, or I think 1 or 2 women out of that 900, and I can tell you now I know probably 200 of them by first name.
But as the clock on President Bush's 48-hour ultimatum wound down, the prevailing feeling was one of impatience.
Their mood was, let's get going already. Let's get this thing over with. They wanted very badly, as they would all say, I want to go north, I want to go south. Either one, just get me home.
And after a while, you started feeling the same way. Let's do this thing now or go home, because the sitting around was driving everybody batty.
They're very enthusiastic, raring to go. We're with what's called the Raging Bulls Tank Company of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division, and we are standing right on the Iraqi border.
As they wait, they are exposed to Saddam Hussein's missiles and possible chemical attacks. NBC's Dana Lewis tonight with the 101st Airborne. Dana.
Roller coaster day for troops out here in the desert. The near constant whine of sirens forcing us to don these masks, come out to the bunkers as we are now. This siren just went off about 10 minutes ago, and we're sitting here waiting for an all clear.
I really found it difficult to sit in there and watch some young soldiers who actually had tears in their eyes as you look through the glass eyepiece on their masks. It was very difficult to sit through those drills, and not just one of them, but sometimes you'd get 3 in 1 hour.
It was incredibly frightening the first time. I remember putting the gas mask on. I remember hearing my labored breathing through it. I could even hear my pulse in my ear.
In the Kuwait desert, an American armada of military power surging to the north through miles of open desert toward the border with Iraq. Convoys miles long and stretching to the horizon of tanks and armored assault vehicles, bristling with heavy weapons and thousands of warriors from the 1st Marine Division, moving into position, ready to attack.
Aboard the aircraft carrier Constellation in the Persian Gulf, a pep talk for war.
When the president says go, look out, it's hammer time.
Air raid sirens.
Wednesday, March 19th, 9:33 p.m. NBC News is first on the air. The control room at NBC News headquarters in New York.
Break us in. Here we go. Break us in. We're on the air.
Target Iraq. Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening, everyone. It has been an evening of tense expectations. The 48-hour deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq has expired about an hour and 30 minutes ago now. And we have reports that American warplanes could be in the air. We're going to go to Peter Arnett, who is now in Baghdad, where it is early Thursday morning, and air raid sirens are sounding across the capital city. Peter, what are you hearing and what are you seeing?
Well, about 30 seconds ago, Tom, the sounds of several planes flying over the city and what seemed to be explosions in the distance.
Just give me shots of Baghdad. Show me it.
The war was underway, launched with carefully choreographed airstrikes intended to wipe out the Iraqi regime.
U.S. intelligence detected what they called a target of opportunity. The hint here that it could have been a senior or very senior member of the Iraqi regime. Nobody's using the name Saddam Hussein, but that there was a target of opportunity in Baghdad, and that's why the attack was undertaken in Baghdad.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Jim Miklashevsky. We're now just seconds away from an appearance by President George W. Bush. The war is underway. The first sounds heard over Baghdad tonight were at about 9:30 Eastern Time. Sunrise there officially at 6:07 this morning. It is now about 6:14 in the capital city. The President of the United States.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
U.S. officials are telling us now, they confirm what we suspected, that Saddam Hussein himself was the target of tonight's airstrikes, that F-117 stealth bombers and as many as 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from U.S. naval ships in the Persian Gulf were aimed at Baghdad tonight. It's still too early to tell, according to officials, whether in fact this airstrike was successful.
In the Kuwait desert, tens of thousands of troops moved out, beginning the 300-mile trip north to Baghdad.
It starts at dawn. There's a full moon and the sun coming up at the same time, soldiers marching in.
I don't have to tell you guys, I know your company commanders all the way down through the chain of command. I told you. Guys, we're going to war. War?
I looked around and I was struck by how young the faces were all around me. I remember looking at David Bloom that morning, and we looked at each other, our eyes met, and we had tears, and it was just knowing that some of these people wouldn't make it back.
We headed out into the dusk. That is when it sunk in that my country's going to war, my country's about to invade another country, and I'm going along for the ride.
We want to go back to Chip now and see what he can tell us. Chip, can you hear me?
Yes, Matt, I can. Off to my right, I can't tell you how far, a number of miles, there is a huge show of artillery. It is like the finale of a 4th of July fireworks, only with obviously deadly consequences.
It was extraordinary, and when we finally crossed the border, we were just cruising. And I poked my head up out of the AAV, the track, the amphibious assault vehicle that I was riding in, and the roar of these machines was absolutely terrifying because there were so many of them and they're all so loud.
It's the most uncomfortable ride you could possibly imagine. They cram about anywhere from 15 to 20 people in this small tin can, and everyone is standing on top of each other. Traveling in an amphibious assault vehicle is like being inside a trash can and being dropped down a flight of stairs.
You hear about the tremendous distances that U.S. troops have traveled, but you have no idea how big the battle space is until you see it from the air. I had a chance to go with a CH-46 of the Red Dragon Squadron. We went over the border from Kuwait into Iraq. Gunners ready for incoming fire, which hit kilos regularly. Out the rear door, 2 oil fires are burning.
Our first daytime flight, it was just the most staggering sight you could imagine. As you came up over the Kuwaiti border, just hundreds of miles of road with tanks, Amtraks, trailer trucks, fuel trucks. There would be 6-lane highways, all the traffic going in one direction, all making their way at great speed.
But the 101st Airborne and Dana Lewis were still waiting for the order to leave Kuwait. feeling frustrated and vulnerable to Iraqi missile attacks.
I think the troops really started to feel that they were sitting ducks, and they just wanted to get it underway. They were anxious to cross the border.
I was going to say, how are things going, but a picture is worth 1,000 words. What's going on there right now?
Well, Matt, this is the third alarm that has gone off today. We had, starting at 1 o'clock this morning, we've had missiles fired into the Kuwaiti desert not far from these camps where many of the American soldiers are getting ready to go into Iraq. And, of course, you know, some of them we are asked to don these gas masks depending on where the missile lands. This one, it may be that it was landing upwind, and so here we are with our gas masks on.
For other reporters, the start of the conflict was disappointing. At the last minute, U.S. military officials prevented NBC News correspondent Tom Aspel from accompanying a special operations unit on its secret mission into Iraq.
We spent the next 12 hours flying back to Germany. And then we sat in Germany feeling sorry for ourselves, and then the war started, so we're watching it on a huge screen in TV. It's looking great. It's looking exactly what the war was supposed to look like. But we're not there. It was really, really disappointing.
Good morning. Rolling toward Baghdad. U.S. troops are on the move through the desert in southern Iraq.
But few viewers who tuned in to NBC's Today Show were disappointed. They saw something unprecedented in war reporting. David Bloom reporting from the Bloommobile as he traveled with the tip of the U.S.-led Spear.
We were with the 315 Infantry of the 3rd Infantry Division, which was the lead force going into Iraq for this huge division of 20,000 soldiers and 250 tanks, hundreds of Bradley fighting vehicles. What they did was they first spent about a half an hour hitting 2 Iraqi observation posts with artillery.
Iraqis began surrendering even before U.S. troops crossed the border. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell joins us tonight from Gotthard. Kelly?
Good evening, Tom. The first report came into U.S. Central Command from what I'm told is a young Army captain in the field. His account, Iraqi soldiers were coming toward him across the Kuwaiti border in small numbers. In 2 separate incidents, first 15 Iraqi soldiers, the second 2 more. They gave themselves up voluntarily to Kuwaiti forces and to the Army's 3rd Infantry Division.
Turn around, kneel down.
Iraqis started pouring out, hands up, ready to surrender.
But what was Saddam Hussein's fate? Hours after the initial strikes designed specifically to take him out, these pictures appeared on Iraqi television.
Some U.S. officials wondered whether the subdued man with the unfamiliar glasses, reading listlessly from a lined pad, was actually Saddam or a double. Tonight, some analysts believe this is Saddam, but think the message may have been taped before the first air raid. So the question remains, is Saddam dead or alive?
You can only imagine how frustrating this is to American intelligence and to the leaders all the way up to, of course, including President Bush. But they do not know definitively whether or not Saddam Hussein did survive.
And what had happened to shock and awe? The overwhelming air assaults on Iraq expected to launch the war.
The Pentagon's campaign was originally dubbed Shock and Awe, but could be called today Shock and Pause, as the U.S. military steps back to assess just how far they might have to go to reach their ultimate objective, and that's to drive out Saddam Hussein.
Good evening. Almost 48 hours into the battle, the war advances with startling speed tonight. This is the scene in Baghdad now, hours before daybreak on Saturday morning in that part of the world, hours after a dramatic attack in which the Pentagon has now called it unprecedented in its precision. Explosions, fireballs, mushroom clouds, a fearsome display of American military might. On Friday, March 21st, air raid sirens split the night in Baghdad. This was shock and awe.
We felt the vibration of that one almost knocked me off my feet in the hotel room here. That was a major building in the presidential palace opposite 3 major buildings. 4, Tom, hit a mile away from us. You'll see the pictures now. There's considerable smoke. There were 4 buildings, 2 of them prized possessions of President Saddam Hussein. Again, more extreme that area. Again, the blast hitting us in the room here. We have our camera tied down. We figured it'd be something like this. Seems like cruise missiles probably, Tom, because there's no sounds of aircraft. The sky now black with smoke in front of us. Just across the Tigris River here, violent explosions. More. The sky lit up. Huge explosions. Blowing apart the prized presidential compound of Saddam Hussein. Many of his major administrative buildings going up in smoke and fire, Tom. Again, another. Just disintegrating here. Bigger than the Gulf War, Tom, the first Gulf War, much bigger, these explosions. This is shock and awe, Tom, for the population of Baghdad. Shock and awe, indeed.
From his Baghdad hotel room, veteran war correspondent Peter Arnett had a frightening view of the punishing bombardment.
The main palace building gone up totally in smoke. Just all gone away, Tom. Just blown apart. We had a ringside view of right in front of us, these major buildings. Secondary explosions, more coming in. More, maybe they're secondary explosions. Every strike has the same devastating pattern. First the light, then the sound, and a powerful blast of hot air that nearly knocks us off our feet. Even though most targets are a mile away, I've never felt anything so intense. One building after another going down, Tom. Right in front of us, at least 10 major buildings destroyed, Tom, in the course of about 2 minutes. An amazing sight. Just like out of an action movie, but this is real. This is real. This is shock and awe, Tom.
500 to 600 cruise missiles from U.S. warships and Air Force B-52s, followed by waves of B-2 stealth bombers and stealth fighters, dropping 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs. And every weapon is precision-guided, deadly accuracy designed to kill only the targets, not innocent civilians.
What is taking place today is as targeted an air campaign as has ever existed.
The night sky just lit up. There were cruise missiles in the sky, and it was an awesome sight.
With the night sky aglow, even in the southern Iraq desert, more ground forces charged across the Kuwait border.
Those armored formations are going to move very, very quickly. It wouldn't surprise me if the 3rd Infantry Division's lead elements have covered somewhere between 150 and 200 miles at this point.
Tom, we're just rolling along. It's nighttime now, obviously, here in Iraq. It's coming up on 9:10, 9:15 at night. So it's been almost 23 hours now since this force first crossed into southern. Large force, the 2nd Brigade of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. And they're just rolling along here, moving north toward Baghdad.
Tom, if you can just visualize this, it's pitch black out there. There's 1,000 or more armored vehicles, 3,000 or 4,000 wheeled vehicles. They're moving in complete blackout conditions, night vision goggles. And while they're moving, they're engaging enemy forces on the move and nailing them at 3,000 meters. They're the first army in history that actually knows where they are in the dark.
NBC's Brian Williams is in Kuwait City, where the sirens have been sounding again tonight. Brian, are the people of Kuwait able to watch the ground action as the American ground units begin to move north?
They are. The coverage, of course, being beamed globally. People in disbelief that with this war, the new marriage of technology, both militarily and in television, that they can watch the actual units like David Bloom's moving north through Iraq, and there is palpable excitement that this neighbor to the north, this tyrant, may not be a problem much longer.
But 2 days into the war, what impact would shock and awe truly have?
As we've seen plenty of shock and awe today, American commanders are convinced that's what it will take to
spur the Iraqi people to action against Saddam Hussein. But NBC military analyst William Arkin warns that shock and awe can cut both ways. While Iraqis might turn on Saddam for making them a target, they could end up hating Americans more for dropping bombs.
All of the entire Desert Storm, 330 weapons landed on Baghdad in 43 days. Today, 330 weapons landed on Baghdad. And so you get a sense now of what they mean when they are saying shock.
NBC's Kelly O'Donnell is in Qatar, where Tommy Franks, the general in charge of all of this, is running the war from the U.S. Central Military Command. What's the report out of there today on the progress of the war so far, Kelly?
Good evening, Tom. Senior CENTCOM officials tell me that the air war is so far going as expected, and they say that the first real sign of assessment will come when daylight returns here not long from now, when they can get their first visual assessment of what has happened.
The ship is already gearing up to launch more air attacks tonight. The war plan is still fluid. However, tonight's assault is not expected to be as intense as the one we saw last night. One pilot described it this way: like a street fight. You punch hard, then you step back, see what the situation is before you decide to punch again.
Combat operations have met with resistance in a number of locations, the most notable of which is in the vicinity of Nasiriyah.
The military called it the Nas. The discussion was that the movie title would be 11 Days in the Nas, because this whole picture of the U.S. military just pushing right through Iraq met a huge stumbling block in Nasiriyah. There was a heavy resistance. Americans were getting killed.
It's been the bloodiest day of the war for American forces. At least 10 more U.S. Marines were killed, 40 more wounded in fierce fighting at Nasiriyah.
It was a fight no one anticipated so early in the war. Just 2 days after the massive shock and awe campaign, coalition forces found themselves doing battle with an enemy highly motivated and difficult to identify.
What we find ourselves running into are these militia units. The Saddam Fedayeen, the Al-Quds, volunteers, the Iraqi intelligence services. These are the people which are causing us the problems right now.
One of the things that they're worried about most is a group called Saddam's Martyrs, a tough, tenacious fighting force that American and British soldiers have met before. Here is Sarah James.
Founded by Saddam's son, Uday, after the first Gulf War, the Fedayeen undergo terrorist-style training at a camp south of Baghdad. Expert estimates put their numbers at anywhere between 15,000 and 60,000. They are well-armed, well-trained, and well-paid by Saddam's regime.
What you have here inside this city, right over there, is you have snipers, Iraqi soldiers who've taken positions and they're moving within the city, putting their heads out windows, taking shots at the U.S. Marines as they move through, and it's a very difficult environment for them to work in.
The Marines' mission in Nasiriyah to secure the 2 bridges that led to Baghdad. But with the attacks from paramilitary fighters, that proved to be far more dangerous than anticipated.
We actually pulled into our position maybe about a mile from where the bridge actually was. And then the whole thing erupted. The artillery, the helicopters, the infantry, they wanted that bridge.
U.S. military commanders say this continuing fight for control of the bridge and the critical route north will likely last for days to come. Their fear is that will result in more U.S. Marine casualties.
On the outskirts of the city, the 507th Maintenance Division, a small convoy of cooks, mechanics, and supply clerks, got caught in a deadly ambush. It's been a very troubling morning. A short time ago, the Arab television network Al Jazeera aired some very disturbing images showing what it said were dead and wounded Americans. The troops shown are in uniform, and based on the way the bodies are positioned and the appearances of the wounds, a senior military official says it appears as if some of the American forces were executed. The Al Jazeera videotape also shows 5 other captured Americans being interrogated. One is a woman.
What's your name?
Shauna.
Shana?
Yes.
Where do you come from?
Texas.
NBC Stone Phillips talked to Shoshana Johnson's parents in an exclusive television interview.
Tom, good evening from El Paso. Last month, 30-year-old Shoshana Johnson, known to family and friends as Shauna, shipped out from Fort Bliss to the Gulf. She's a cook with the 507th Maintenance Company and did not expect to see combat. But this past weekend, in the pell-mell push toward Baghdad, her convoy of support vehicles took a wrong turn, found itself cut off and under enemy fire. Specialist Johnson was among those taken prisoner, then videotaped by Iraqi television. Tonight, Shauna Johnson's loved ones wait and hope. Her 2-year-old daughter, Janelle, her 2 sisters, and her parents, Claude and Eunice, who came here from Panama to raise their family and to serve this country. I sat down with Shauna's mother and father earlier today. As you think about your daughter, a prisoner of war tonight, what's your biggest concern?
How she's being treated right now. I'm sorry to be so emotional. I was here sitting quietly waiting. I hope that she's being treated. I hope, as a lady, I hope that she's okay.
We were south of Nasiriyah and we picked up information about problems that had happened there. And as we're heading north to Nasiriyah, we did come across some vehicles that were twisted and mangled, and it looked like there'd been a pretty heavy battle right where we were traveling through.
We had heard that they were captured. We heard that people were executed. We all discussed it. We all pretty much believed it. I made the decision not to be captured alive.
The news that American soldiers had been not only captured, but executed, infuriated the troops.
I would say it juiced them up even more to get out there and fight and finish this thing. They wanted to go to Baghdad. This made them want to go to Baghdad even more.
And just one day after the 507th was ambushed, more bad news.
These images from Iraqi television. Celebrations around a downed Apache attack helicopter, which appears largely intact. This taking place 50 miles south of Baghdad. Central Command officials confirm a helicopter was lost and is listing its crew as missing in action.
2 more prisoners of war had been taken, and the battle for control of the 2 bridges in Nasiriyah intensified.
9 days into the Battle of Nasiriyah, U.S. Cobra gunships firing down into the streets of this city as U.S. Marines target the Fedayeen guerrillas.
We were more or less trapped under a bridge that went across the Euphrates, and most of the battles were across that small gap of water. With our unit, it was a scout sniper unit. Their orders were anything that moves over that side of the river, man, woman, child, dog, cat, take it out.
We have to get down on this bridge as much as we can stand up on it because of snipers.
The tension level is at 100%. Everybody's on their toes. There's no more helmets off and flak jackets open. This is the real thing. And that's really when I realized how deep we were. You know, that, wow, we really are on the front line.
The Iraqis trying to draw the Americans into the center of the city with rocket-propelled grenade fire. Saddam's aim to pin the Marines down in house-to-house fighting here. So far, the U.S. responding with Hellfire missiles and Zuni rockets. NBC cameraman Sebastian Rich, under sniper fire, shot these pictures today of the Cobra attack on Iraqi artillery nests.
We had a couple of sniper rounds that went over our heads, but are way above our heads. I mean, your knees bend a little bit when that happens, but we were also feeling the percussion waves from those Hellfire missiles as they hit those buildings.
Stood in the middle of the bridge, in between the American army and whatever Iraqi forces there were, and you take your chance. I'm constantly aware and constantly very frightened, and I believe fear is a very good and valuable friend, because if you're not frightened, you're pretty stupid, because you certainly won't last as long as I have.
After long days of fighting, the bridges were finally secured, and with the Iraqi threat subdued, civilians came out to greet the soldiers.
There's a young Marine, Alex Rivera, who is so excited. and he sees these kids, and he climbs up on the hood of a Humvee, and he starts singing a rap song.
Push him up, push him up. Ooh, ooh. Push him up, push him up. Ooh, ooh.
It was like a bright spot in this like really miserable place, that there's this guy having fun with children.
Shake, shake your body. Shake, shake, shake your body.
In the midst of war, it was a rare moment of joy. Sebastian Rich snapped this photograph.
It's a photograph of Iraqi children and men and women greeting an American Marine with obvious glee in their villages. It's something that I never thought I'd see in my wildest dreams.
I am absolutely filthy. We have been out now sleeping on the ground, literally in a garbage dump last night, in a landfill, and a sewage fill the other night. My hands are black, my face is black. I haven't showered in a couple of weeks. This is all I've worn in the last several weeks. And that's what the Marines have gone through.
Although they were there only to cover the war, NBC's embeds lived just like any of the warriors, any warrior, in the middle of fierce combat.
What they are doing here is literally digging in. They do that so if there is any shrapnel flying across the field at night, any artillery or mortar rounds fired at the camp, it will fly over them if they are down below the surface of the ground. And that is hard work indeed, believe me. We have had to do it ourselves.
It was like taking a bunch of soft, white-collar guys and putting them out in a construction job. My back was in agony for the first few weeks, and my muscles hurt from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet.
Obviously, we don't get a chance to change or take a shower or anything like that. This is the first time I've taken off my sunglasses, which I hope I haven't lost here in a while, because once we start rolling again, the dust kicks up, and it makes it very difficult to see.
It's a good 85 degrees today, and inside this thick mop suit with a charcoal lining, there's no opportunity really for it to breathe. It gets hot.
It's a dirty existence. 34, 37 days I was with these Marines, and I got one shower, and that was lucky for me.
Basically what we're eating are things like this. This is the chicken breast strips with chunky salsa, courtesy of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And basically what you do is you open these things up, and they contain a heating unit, which is actually this flameless heater right here. And what you do is you pop it inside this, pour a tiny little bit of water in, and that's how you stay nourished.
There was no question in-bed life was challenging, but from the beginning, NBC's journalists knew perseverance would gain them trust and acceptance.
You know, I mean, it's not easy conditions, but as I've said, it's, you know, their lot in life is a lot harder than ours, because in addition to everything else, they're trying to fight.
We were told, if you eat what they eat, sleep where they sleep, and suffer the same deprivations that they do, they will take you on as one of their own. And they most certainly did.
I have to tell you that sleeping in an M88 is not your luxury hotel by any means. It's little cramped quarters, but beggars can't be choosers, and we did catch a few hours of sleep.
Producer Leiling Ju, NBC's lone female in bed.
And there was a large tent. There were 16 of us, 15 men and me. And there was a sergeant major who set up a shelf to sort of give me a little bit of privacy. But I found out a couple of weeks later that I didn't have the privacy I expected, because the Army supplies them with night vision goggles.
But there was one thing the embeds had that the troops did not: satellite telephones.
How's the baby?
He's good. He has your eyes.
Because we were out there, they learned of births, deaths, other major life events in their families, and vice versa.
Wow.
Yeah.
Came out big, huh?
Yes, bigger than they told me.
It's impossible not to be in these harsh conditions without getting to a point where you actually care about each other. You hear about each other's families. You'd be inhuman to not care about the people. But as a journalist, you feel like, well, I want to keep this professional distance.
And what would happen if the journalist had to report news that was unflattering to the U.S. forces? Dana Lewis found out before he and the 101st Airborne even left Kuwait.
We understand that somebody threw 2 grenades into the tent of a leadership tent, as it's being called, some high-ranking officers in that camp. Initial reports indicating 10 people were wounded, 6 of them seriously. Major Trey Kate telling NBC News Now that there is a missing soldier from that camp, and he is being sought after as a possible suspect in this incident. We obviously wanted to report on that story. It was a major story. So the next day, when there was a memorial for the soldiers who had been attacked, in fact, we were left behind and we weren't taken to the base. And when I asked our colonel about it, why didn't you allow us to cover that very public event? He said, look, you should be thinking about the war now. Why are you still covering this story for a second day? It did begin to give us a window on perhaps one of the drawbacks of the embed process.
It was a real challenge editorially because every day, beginning of every report that you started, you had to constantly separate the word I and we. And you had to constantly keep reminding yourself that you're there just to observe and document what they are doing.
Still, with their unprecedented access, the embeds gave us what we had never seen before. A fascinating, very close-up look at modern-day war.
Just before dark here, a firefight in this Iraqi neighborhood.
This is a very fast-moving force by traditional military standards, but it's still a long train, if you will, a long convoy.
Is it difficult to determine who the civilians are and who the Iraqi military is?
Yes, it is.
They are going after the Fedayeen, but certainly they are a problem that needs to be dealt with before this movement continues northward.
It really is amazing that you can take some reporter in his 40s who's got no military background whatsoever and put him out in a war zone with a bunch of Marines from 18 to 20-something and have them get along like old-time best buddies and do something really important and really meaningful.
This, without question, is the most intensely reported war in history, probably the greatest televised event in the history of mankind.
We are watching live pictures of a fierce firefight that is going on in the port city of Qasr.
Vehicles approaching from the east, Cat! It's Cat vehicles from the east!
For the first time ever, stories from the battlefield broadcast live.
You're really getting a close-up look at war live on television.
Roger, requesting ammo resupply, over.
The technical aspect of what happened during this war is what made this war different for every television viewer at home.
Hang on a second. Let's see. Stay down, stay down.
Viewers at home were watching this as it happened, as it developed, every little piece was coming together. So as I'm crawling up there, people at home are kind of like, oh my God, I wonder what's going to happen.
What do you see out there in the distance?
Right now we're seeing a white building. There's some civilians out there. If we do engage into a firefight, their life will be in jeopardy.
And I had several people tell me, couldn't believe it, your head was so high, you needed to get your head lower. Like all of a sudden, everybody's an instant armchair quarterback on how this is supposed to work.
And there we see him live. David, what can you tell us? What's been going on where you are?
Well, Chris, as you know, we've been traveling with the 3rd ID, the 315 Infantry, for the past, almost 3 days now.
Behind me, you can see the smoke rising. That is the remnants of a battle, about an hour-long firefight that we were right in the middle of.
Having the capability to broadcast a war in real time raised delicate questions.
I had thought this through before the beginning of the war. In a live situation, somebody around you is injured or killed. What are we going to do?
One day we were filming a live stand-up with Kerry, and out of the corner of my eye I saw a medic Hummer come through, and a staff sergeant was whispering in my ear, "There's wounded coming through on here."
And we want to go back to him for a quick update, Kerry, on the injured. That's been a very difficult couple of days for the forces that you're traveling with.
It has been particularly difficult. You're looking at pictures right now of doctors, Navy corpsmen working on 3 Marines who were wounded down.
You've got to remember, this is live picture going into people's homes of wounded American soldiers. Now, you can bet your bottom dollar there's a very good chance that this kid's mum is watching this, right? And this kept occurring to myself and Kerry while we're filming.
Kerry later taped an interview with one of the wounded soldiers who wanted to talk on camera.
How are you?
I'm all right, just hurts pretty bad.
And then as we got to the end of the interview, I said, well, is there any messages you want to send home?
Mom, Dad, I'm all right, and be back when we get back.
We finished, and that was that. And I thought for a moment, as everything was sort of taking a pause, I've got a satellite phone right here. Maybe he wants to talk to his mom. Well, not only is his mom thrilled to hear from him, she'd been watching the Today Show. She had seen that live report. Well, now here she is talking to her son.
I just wanted to call and talk to you. I'm okay. I got shot in the hand, so I got to have surgery on it. The bullet's still in my hand, but other than that, I'm okay.
It airs, and as I later found out, it became a rather momentous occasion in embedded journalist history, which of course is brand new. There really is a formal process by which family members are informed of what's happened to people in the field. And all of a sudden, it had changed. They'd seen it live on television, they'd made the call, son got to talk to mom.
And yet for families of soldiers and embeds alike, seeing pictures of loved ones in the midst of war was a double-edged sword.
It was particularly tough on my wife, and therefore it was tough on me.
Good morning, Matt. I'm on that bridge, a bridge that crosses the Euphrates River, as you say, and another bridge about 2.5 miles north of here that crosses the Saddam Canal. 10 Marines died fighting to get control of these bridges.
This whole live aspect of the television, as unique and as incredible as it was, also brings a certain amount of immediacy to the battlefield that brings home, if that bullet comes flying across and you're in the wrong place, get killed. So I completely understand why she limited her viewing and at one point really just stopped watching it.
Early in the war, the mother of a fallen Marine pilot spoke these memorable words about the impact of a televised war.
I truly admire what all of the network news and all the new technology is doing today to bring it into our homes. But for the mothers and the wives who are out there watching, it is murder. It's heartbreak. We can't leave the television. Every tank, every helicopter, is that my son? And I just need you to be aware that technology, it's great, but there are moms, there are dads, there are wives out there that are suffering because of this. That's all. That's why I'm doing this.
That is so eloquent and it's so appropriate, and we will do whatever we can to reinforce that message repeatedly. We have talked about it here, but probably not enough, because war is not about technology. It is about life and death, young men and young women putting their lives on the line in the service of their country.
That's right.
And behind every one of those dots that we show you on a screen, or behind one of those computer-generated graphics, there is a life that is at risk.
That's right.
Thank you again.
We're in the midst of a just vicious sandstorm in south central Iraq right now.
On March 25th, coalition forces encountered a new and brutal enemy, the weather.
And I'm going to break another one of these chem lights so that you can get a little bit better view of us. The sun doesn't set here for another hour to hour and a half, and yet you can't see 3 feet in front of you.
The day began with fierce winds kicking up the desert sand.
David, weather has been a major concern. I understand some nasty storms have been rolling through your area. What's the latest on that?
It is a major concern, Matt. The wind has been gusting here 30, 40, 50 miles an hour all day.
Chip Reed is reporting with the 1st Marine Division. Chip, good morning to you, and tell me, are the same sandstorms affecting your positions?
Absolutely, Matt. They are swirling around. They have turned the sky a kind of reddish brown all around me. You can't see any more than, say, 50 to 100 feet in any direction. I am cowering behind an armored vehicle right now in order to make this call. If I were to step out into the wind, I wouldn't hear you and you wouldn't hear me.
Imagine, 60-mile-an-hour winds in a world filled with orange baby powder. That's what it was like, and it was in your eyes, in your ears, in your throat, in your nose, all in your chemical weapons suit. It just got everywhere.
I think a lot of the soldiers are getting the same thing called like desert throat, where you're just losing your voice because the dust is just awful.
They blinded you, they suffocated you, they made life impossible. The smallest chore took 10 times longer to carry out.
By the end of the day, the blinding sand was more than annoying. It was creating serious problems for the troops. Sandstorm, one of the hazards of desert warfare, how it has slowed the Allied advance. No one had a more intense experience in today's sandstorms than NBC's David Bloom traveling with the 2nd Battalion, the 3rd Infantry Division, east of Karbala.
It's been a day of frustration for these soldiers. Sand has been whipping across the Iraqi desert all day, gusts up to 50 miles an hour. Here, a maintenance crew tries to repair the engine of a broken Bradley fighting vehicle, trying to keep the American war effort on track.
If we don't get this engine done, it could be our life.
What happens is, as they're trying to do the repairs, the sand is just whipping in, and it makes it very difficult with the sand sticking to the oil. Very tough for anybody to see anything at all.
I remember people back in New York saying, "Will you white balance the camera? It's red, it's red." I did. That was the color that we saw there.
The sand is also causing problems for the close air support this tank brigade requires. These units rely upon Apache attack helicopters. They simply can't fly in this weather. The supply lines, what you've got is you've got supplies coming up to these forces from hundreds and hundreds of miles from Kuwait in terms of fuel, in terms of food, in terms of water. And the fact of the matter is, well, we're not running critically low on those supplies. We are running low. So for those reasons, the sandstorms will likely delay any action from this division in terms of a cohesive big fight for at least a day, perhaps more.
It basically shut down the convoy for 3 days. It meant that we were down at one point to 1 MRE, 1 meal, 1 bottle of water, and we didn't know when we'd be getting the next.
It is orange, it is rust, it is just this brown muck that we're standing in the middle of, and what you're seeing at home on your television set is exactly what we're seeing out here. And the weather just didn't let up. Around 4 o'clock this afternoon, the sky suddenly turned a rusty red, and then an hour and a half before sunset, black as night.
By nightfall, rain had moved in, making an already miserable day seem intolerable. It was darkness during the day brought on by sandstorms so thick they shut out the sun and slowed down the coalition drive for Baghdad. First sand, then slashing rain and sheets of lightning have left U.S. troops fighting not just the Iraqi soldiers, but also the forces of nature.
You've got Marines who've been out here for 3 days involved in a very tough urban battle, who had to put up with a sandstorm today. They've only had maybe in some cases 1 or 2 hours sleep in the last couple of days. They have really been engaging the enemy here, and now it's going to be a miserable night because the rain is coming down, and it's a heavy rain here.
The storm brought dust and sand from as far away as Egypt and Libya. It was a day no one in the Iraq desert was likely to forget, and when it was all over, David Bloom recounted his view from the middle of it all.
The wind has been gusting here 30, 40, 50 miles an hour all day. We're in south central Iraq right now with the 2nd Brigade of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. It's blowing really hard. We're all wearing these. I feel like I'm on the ski slopes in Colorado or Utah or something like that. It is really kicked up, as you can see, in the last half an hour or so here. The wind is just blowing really fiercely. I'm going to have my photographer Craig White pan off here, and you can barely see anything. The wind has really picked up in the last half hour or so, and now the visibility is virtually nil. What's incredible here is now it's about 45 minutes to an hour later. It's about 5 minutes after 5 o'clock in the late afternoon, and it's actually much brighter out now than it was, say, 45 minutes to an hour ago. It's definitely a function of the lights at this time of day, but it's also been the function for the last couple hours of just the wind and the sand just literally enveloping us in darkness.
NBC's David Bloom with his intrepid cameraman Craig White tonight, one of the best with the 3rd Infantry Division battling that severe sandstorm. The weather is supposed to clear sometime tomorrow. Although American and coalition forces are moving swiftly toward their objectives, it has not been by any means a trouble-free battle zone, especially in the South. We get the latest tonight from NBC's Jim Miklashevsky now at the Pentagon. Jim?
Tom, tonight American ground troops are only 100 miles from Baghdad and what could be the most dangerous part of the war. The shock and awe bombing from the air was replaced today by an intense but far more conventional war on the ground. At his first briefing today, the war's commander, General Tommy Franks, warned it won't be easy.
There may well be tough days ahead.
That warning came just 3 days into the war, and the closer U.S. troops got to Baghdad, the more real that threat became.
The most dangerous situation I was in was we were ambushed one day, and somebody up there was taking sniper shots at us.
NBC's Chip Reed is traveling with the 1st Marines. They're dug in around El Hilla tonight with hard fighting starting early and going long.
Well, Tom, we just heard the bone-jarring boom of some mortar shells going off just a few feet from where we are. I and my crew were taking cover. We came under small arms fire a short time ago.
This is Dana Lewis in Kifl, south of Karbala. Today, an airborne assault.
When we went into the town of Kifl, which was a key road over the Euphrates River, we had 4 mortars fired in on our position, and 105 millimeter mortars create tremendous explosions, a lot of shrapnel.
At this Army post, 4 mortars exploding 200 feet away from us, a close call. The decision is made to relocate down the road. As we do, sniper fire.
Okay, we've just had shots fired in our direction from over the berm.
It's horrifying because you really don't know where the next one's going to hit.
One mortar would hit, and you started to run one way, and another one would hit in front of you, and you really don't know where to hide because the sound of gunfire echoes all over the city. They're firing mortars and then moving a position. They're sniping, they fire bullets and then move to another window or another rooftop, and you have no idea where it's coming from.
It was a very close call. A little too close for comfort.
Saddam's Fedayeen now seem to be attacking coalition troops with a vengeance.
The people who have been engaging in these ambushes on the Marine convoys coming up this road in the general direction of Baghdad are Saddam's Fedayeen. We have been told by commanders here that they consider the Fedayeen to Saddam as the Gestapo was to Hitler.
CENTCOM officials suspect they faked more than one surrender with deadly consequences.
There were troops dressed in civilian clothes that appeared to welcome the forces and then ambushed them.
The fake surrenders signaled a disturbing turn in the way Saddam loyalists were willing to wage war.
4 American soldiers were killed when a man in a taxi full of explosives blew himself up at a checkpoint near the city of Najaf. It's the first attack of its kind against U.S. forces in the 9-day-old ground war, and Iraq said tonight it will not be the last.
They just weren't fighting an army now, that there were suicide bombers, and there was also the paramilitaries that were using the cover of the population sometimes to approach American forces.
That changed the rules of engagement from then on. I think Americans were in much more of a shoot-first posture.
For the embeds, fear became a constant, if sometimes unspoken, reality.
The truth is, I was scared most of the war. You know, I mean, if you're not scared, I'm not sure you're normal.
I never had any moments of, this is it, I'm going to die. I had a lot of moments of, I really ought to get my head down. And I had some moments where Marines would yell at me, get your effing head down.
For about 48 hours, we did not see NBC's Brian Williams, and that's because he and NBC News analyst General Wayne Downing were hunkered down in the Iraqi desert during a U.S. Army helicopter mission that suddenly turned dangerous. Tonight, Brian and his crew, we're happy to report, are safely back in Kuwait City after a harrowing ordeal. Brian?
Tom, we asked the U.S. Army to take us along on an air mission. They accepted. We discussed the danger. We were aware it was Iraqi airspace after all. We weren't cavalier about it. Then things just started to happen. It was supposed to be a routine Army aviation mission, and it turned out to be one of the most dangerous missions they've launched here so far. 4 giant Vietnam-era Chinook twin-rotor helicopters, lifting giant sections of a steel bridge to be erected inside Iraq over the Euphrates River, a 17,000-pound chunk of steel dangling beneath us that made our small armada a low, lumbering, and inviting target. Our lead chopper pilot remembers seeing a pickup truck driver stop and wave, while another man pulled back a tarp, stood up in the back of the truck, and fired an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade.
We set down hard and fast. We got out of the back ramp of that chopper, and General Downing said, "We're in about the most dangerous place in the world right now, gentlemen."
Infantrymen took up position, protecting 4 vulnerable birds parked shoulder to shoulder on a plot of land considered hot for the presence of armed Iraqis nearby.
We saw brilliant rocket streaks, we thought, coming toward us. We thought we were the target. We heard small arms fire. We heard the concussion of bombing raids. We were in the middle of it.
U.S. military commanders.
Being in the midst of danger was an inevitable risk, but sometimes the brutality of war was far more disturbing.
We've got 30 casualties, 3-0.
On this day, it started early and just kept coming. Constant stream of choppers and trucks bearing patience. And for Tim Eulinger, out of the chaos, destiny arrived wrapped in a blanket.
Then I saw it reveal the face of a little child, a little 3-year-old girl. Well, the second I saw her eyes, I knew that it was really bad.
I'll just never get that image out of my mind. They couldn't do anything for that little girl.
You know it's a war zone, but you are never prepared for what you see. The bodies were still in the cars days later, and then you would have dogs eating the bodies of men. And there's the smell, and it's really gruesome. And there's just death everywhere on some of those roads that were leading to Baghdad.
It's now 7 o'clock in the morning, and this hotel, which is surrounded by Serb militia, is still under attack.
Death that included the loss of friends. ITN's Terry Lloyd, one of 15 journalists who died during the course of the war, was cameraman Sebastian Rich's best friend.
He was killed by friendly fire, so-called friendly fire. You know, what a terrible name that is, friendly fire. I had to deal with that very, very quickly to enable me to get on with my job.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Chip Reed and his producer John Zito lost a new friend. As embeds, they had become close to Major Kevin Nave, a Marine.
He's somebody who I figured would probably be a friend, even after this, and we would stay in touch.
It just hit us like a ton of bricks. And what made it all the more tragic was how he died. He was run over by one of the Marines' own vehicles. The man was crushed in the middle of the night by a bulldozer.
In recent days of intense combat, the men of the 3rd Battalion rarely showed emotion over their losses. In war, they said, there is little time to mourn, the battle taking all of their strength.
Our heart is heavy, the loss is real.
Today, with a lull in the fighting, these Marines took a short break from war and gave themselves a chance to grieve.
Somebody started crying, and the floodgates opened, and there were people crying all around me.
These kids put up such a rough exterior and try to come across as tough and pretty macho, and then all of a sudden you just see them all crying like children.
Grace will lead me home.
This is an NBC News special report.
here is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. It is early Wednesday morning in Doha, Qatar. Let's go now to the briefing and General Brooks. On April 1st, a stunning announcement out of Central Command in Qatar.
Coalition forces have conducted a successful rescue mission of a U.S. Army prisoner of war held captive in Iraq. The soldier has been returned to a coalition-controlled area. More details will be released as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
I think that we can get some more details now from NBC Jim McLashevsky, who's at the Pentagon for us. Jim, what do you have?
Tom, a senior Army official tells NBC News tonight that this U.S. Army soldier who was rescued is 19-year-old Private First Class Jessica Lynch of Palestine, West Virginia.
It was one of the most dramatic moments of the war. Private First Class Jessica Lynch rescued under the cover of darkness by U.S. Special Forces.
This is a Coalition Black Hawk helicopter on the ground and PFC Lynch on a stretcher being carried to safety.
Good evening. Late news from Iraq tonight. A daring rescue mission in the middle of the night has found and freed an American who'd been missing in action. A young soldier from West Virginia, still a teenager. When she disappeared, her father said, "I just want them to bring her back safely." Tonight they have. Here's Dennis Murphy with the latest.
The freed POW was a member of that maintenance supply convoy from Fort Bliss, Texas, that took a wrong turn during the early hours of the battle for Nasiriyah and found itself caught in a deadly Iraqi ambush. And only hours later, television pictures of 5 of them were being broadcast around the world. Terrified young Americans being interrogated. But Private Lynch was not one of them. Her father, Gregory Lynch, spoke to the cameras.
Jessie's a wonderful daughter, and we hope for her speedy return.
NBC's Kerry Sanders and his team in Nasiriyah had known for days that a top-secret rescue mission was in the works.
I'm invited down to a meeting, and they say, "Kerry, it's going down tonight. Special Forces is going to go in, and they're going to rescue Jessica Lynch. And it's going to happen at 12:30 tonight." Obviously, can't report anything about this.
The story had been slowly unfolding for days. After ferocious combat in Nasiriyah, Marines finally seized control of a local hospital, which proved to be the headquarters of Iraqi guerrilla fighters.
They now have full control of this property here, and if this is a hospital, it's certainly different than just about any hospital you'll find in the world because of what's parked in the parking lot here.
Kerry got an exclusive look inside.
We're in a room here in the hospital that has a bed, but it also has some other things here. Staff Sergeant, what does this mean to you when you see this battery here?
Originally, when we did the breach on the room, we saw the battery lying next to the bed, and we assumed that it may have been a torture chamber or some sort of torturing device.
What do you see here?
We have some of the, we have the mask.
We found gas masks, basically a lot of paraphernalia that you wouldn't have found in any hospital. And we found quite a few Iraqi dead soldiers that had taken the full might, and it was shock and awe on that one hospital.
Inside the hospital, the Marines made another grim discovery.
In a back room, the uniform of at least one U.S. servicewoman. It was cut up and covered in blood, the name patch and American flag torn off. While hospitals worldwide all have areas to hold unruly patients, in this hospital, U.S. Marines suspect this part may have been used to detain American prisoners of war.
They knew that Americans had been at this location, and they knew that the 507th Maintenance Division had been ambushed down the way. It was a logical jump to think that they'd been brought here.
It's at this point, according to published reports, something happens that's right out of Hollywood. An Iraqi citizen identified as an English-speaking lawyer, someone the Marines call by the name Mohammed, sees an American female prisoner in a bed in Nasiriyah's other hospital, the Saddam Hospital, where his wife works as a nurse. Mohammed, according to reporters who talked to him later in the field, then goes to the Marines, risking his life crossing over into their secure lines, and tells them he knows exactly where the missing American woman is.
Special Forces begins to show up, and they stand out like a sore thumb. You can spot them a mile away. They look different, they act different, there's everything different about them.
After days of careful planning, Special Forces made their move with the help of Marines on the ground.
It was funny in one respect because I knew exactly for the first time ever in my life where to point the camera before the battle started, you know, because I had grid coordinates, I had a staff sergeant standing next to me with night vision goggles saying, "Pan your camera 2 degrees over there and turn your camera on," and there it was. A battle just erupted in front of the camera, and that was a diversionary battle to get Jessica out.
Went back up to the tactical area, and I spoke to the major who was up there. I said, "They get her? What happened?" He goes, "Carrie, it is so quiet on the radio, I have no idea what happened." I'm thinking, I've got to call the office and say, "Do you guys know anything?"
But Kerry couldn't get a signal out. Every satellite was blocked. He went to sleep not knowing the mission's outcome. The next morning, he awoke to the news.
Everybody is celebrating, you know, it's big news, everybody's very happy. And so all of the information that I had, all of these sort of details now, after the fact, was put together for the first time.
NBC's Kerry Sanders was with the 8th Marines when the first tip came in.
The rescue operation began with a fierce barrage from the 2nd Battalion 1st Marines, firing on Ba'ath Party headquarters to draw out Iraqi soldiers. That diversion providing cover so Special Operations Forces could drop into Saddam Hospital. Within hours, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, and Air Force pilots were executing a rescue operation.
That morning, Kerry spoke directly to Jessica's father in Palestine, West Virginia.
Thanks to the wonders of modern technology, Kerry Sanders is in Nasiriyah. He's an NBC correspondent, and he was following the story, Mr. Lynch, of your daughter's rescue. Kerry, can you tell Mr. Lynch just any pertinent details that he might find interesting in terms of Jessie's rescue?
I think what he would probably find the most interesting is how closely this was being monitored by Special Forces, and before that, the Marines who are here. We're with the 2nd Battalion 8th Marines. They're the ones who went in on that first hospital location. I think it's important to note that there are civilians here who continually passed information back to the U.S. military, giving information of where she was. And eventually, as late as yesterday, a note came out. It was a handwritten note. According to the person who looked at it, it appeared to be written in a woman's handwriting. It was in English, and it said, "She's still alive. She's in XXX room of the hospital."
The rescue of Jessica Lynch became one of the most memorable moments of the war. A morale boost for all those on the ground, all those at home, and for the 3 NBC embeds who kept the lid on the story for days.
You're doing great, Jessica. You're doing wonderful, okay?
Welcome back.
Just like I told you, okay? We're on a plane now, and we're going to go to Kuwait, okay?
As you know, Mr. Lynch, this is a happy ending. Your daughter's been pulled out of there alive.
Yes, yes, sir.
Well, thank
And we
goodness.
thank you.
And the movement of the other Republican Guard forces to reinforce them, those are their concerns, because obviously that's the force that they're planning on confronting.
The Americans continue to launch the MLRS rockets, the multiple launch rocket systems, which we've seen firing 30, 40, 50 times in the last several hours, some at very, very close range, to attack Iraqi positions closer into the city.
By the first week of April, David Bloom's reports from the tip of the spear had captivated the nation. The Bloom-mobile's thrilling images creating more buzz than he ever imagined.
Every time I mentioned that I was embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division, the first thing people ask me, were you with David Bloom on the tank? That is powerful stuff. David's work grabbed people's imagination in a way that very few other people managed to do.
His reports transported us right to the front lines of the war. Near Al Amariya, NBC's David Bloom has crossed the Euphrates River with the 3rd Infantry Division, confronting little resistance as they close in on Baghdad.
Now Baghdad is within striking distance, just a few short miles away, as U.S. troops make their final push forward.
And on Friday, April 4th, with U.S. troops converging on their target, he gave us a look at just how tense things were becoming.
Once again tonight, we're with the 315 Infantry, this combat battalion from the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. The job of this force, and there are other elements of the 3rd ID that are now closer into Baghdad, but the job of the force we're with is to guard a bridge, a critical crossing over the Euphrates River. So critical that the Iraqis keep trying to take back the bridge, with disastrous results. The charred remains of Iraqi tanks litter the main roadway. Destroyed Iraqi armored personnel carriers smolder in tall grass near the riverbanks. Pickup trucks filled with Iraqi soldiers carried them only to their graves. So that's the very latest from this location. We're about 25 miles right now southwest of Baghdad.
But sadly, the reports David filed on April 4th would be his last.
Good morning. Sad news today from the front lines of Iraq. NBC's David Bloom, a husband and father, adventurous spirit, and our colleague, died overnight. We'll remember his life today, Sunday, April 6th, 2003.
For the first time in 5 days, this force is once again on the move. If I could ask my photographer crew to pan forward here, you can see...
Welcome to Today. I'm Soledad O'Brien.
And I'm Matt Lauer. Katie Kirk joining us from Washington, D.C. this morning to say it's a difficult morning. Doesn't even come close, Katie.
I know, and just seeing those pictures of David sitting next to Soledad and, of course, covering the story in Iraq that he loved to cover so much is just, it leaves you speechless, really.
It is. It's shocking news. We should say that David was not killed in combat. From what we understand, he suffered a pulmonary embolism Sunday morning, Baghdad time. He was airlifted from the battlefield and died at a military field medical unit this morning.
David woke up, reached over for the phone that we had in the Bluemobile where he was sleeping, and made a phone call. And last time I saw him completely fine was when he came out of that car, having just hung up, and he was smiling to himself. Which is a good way to remember him.
It came out of nowhere. It happened in a matter of minutes. No one expected it.
I look up and David was on the ground. And he had collapsed.
And I remember Joe Todd, the person in front of me, the commander of our vehicle, looking up in the air and going, "Oh, God." And I knew what it was. He just had gotten word that David didn't make it. And I remember biting my lip and just holding back tears, looking up in the sky, and saw this one hawk over the top of us, over the battlefield, and it just kept circling, going higher and higher and higher, and I lost it into the sun, and I kept thinking that was David's spirit.
Consumed by grief, the NBC crew traveling with David in Iraq was faced with an incredibly difficult decision.
Within minutes, we had to make a decision. Do we stop right now? Can we stop right now? What would David want?
I didn't want to leave him. I couldn't leave him. And I felt like so helpless when he was dying that if I could help get him home sooner to his family, then I thought that would have been at least something I could have tried to do.
The rest of David Bloom's crew decided they would honor him by continuing on to Baghdad.
I gathered everybody around who was left, 4 of us who were left. And to a person, we all agreed that David would want us to continue this. We were not guaranteed any safe passage out, but primarily we wanted to fulfill what David started. Within a matter of minutes, we were at it again.
On the air, NBC News devoted much of the day to honoring one of its brightest young stars.
Now the sad news about David Bloom, our dashing and resourceful correspondent who has been reporting from the front lines.
As he roared across that desert, you could feel the country's heart pounding, so people saluting, people cheering, and all of us at NBC feeling this enormous pride in the Bloomster.
NBC News President Neil Shapiro said, David Bloom was one of the best in the business. He was relentless in his drive to get the story first and get it right. He loved nothing better than being out front on a big story. In the last few weeks, that is exactly where he was.
Only 39, he was a reporter's reporter, endlessly curious, precise, so tenacious he'd make a bulldog seem timid. Wanting to spend more time with the wife and 3 daughters he adored, in 2000 he began co-hosting Weekend Today, endearing himself with his boyish charm.
Let's make some cotton candy, because I know my kids are watching, and if we don't use this big machine, they'll be really disappointed.
The same puckish good humor he carried into the Iraqi desert.
Oh, what are you doing?
David Bloom, a rich life and career that was gung-ho, glorious, and all too short.
His love of his life, his wife Melanie, and their 3 darling daughters, was so exuberant, it was contagious. And so this is hard. Our grief is great because the hole is so large. For Kerry Sanders, the grief was overwhelming. Before crossing the border into Iraq, the 2 close friends had shared a special dinner in Kuwait.
We sat there for about 2 hours and we just laughed about where we were, what we were about to go cover, doing this thing like pinching ourselves. Can you imagine we're here on this story? 2 guys from Miami getting ready to go and cover this war.
Just a few days before David died, they'd even swapped in-bed stories on the air.
I'm just curious what your sleeping conditions are like. What's your back like, and how often do you get a chance to take off your vest? I know that you've got an armored vehicle, so I'm not sure whether you have to wear it all the time or not.
Yeah, we do take it off absolutely from time to time, and what we've got now is we've got 4 soldiers and my photographer and myself potentially sleeping inside this vehicle.
But now that David was gone, it all seemed so insignificant.
I really began to question the whole reason of why we're here, and this is stupid, I'm a reporter, this is a war, what am I doing here? What kind of information are we really providing? And all those sort of questions that you do to yourself. You question the whole thing.
Then Kerry was reminded of the great sacrifice of war, the grief so many others were enduring.
I think Heather Allen, the bureau chief in Kuwait City, said it best when she went to meet David's body, and she said there were so many bodies and every one of them was somebody's David Bloom. And it really put it into perspective that our loss was the same loss that so many other people were also experiencing.
A few days later, the 3rd Infantry held a moving memorial service for 3 fallen soldiers, 2 of its own, and for David Bloom.
Target Iraq, the battle for Baghdad. This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. It is now early Friday morning in Iraq, and American forces are at the gateway to Baghdad. Saddam today made another appeal for Iraqis to fight back, and his television network aired remarkable footage of the Iraqi president strolling through a Baghdad neighborhood, followed by a small but enthusiastic crowd. Was it really Saddam? It was the first week of April, and still the question remained, was he dead or alive?
Intelligence officials say it appears to be Saddam Hussein. If it is Saddam, it would be his first public appearance in years. But when was the tape made? And does this prove Saddam survived that devastating attack on his bunker the night the war began? The administration tried to downplay Saddam's importance.
And whether he is there at the end or not, or found or not, is almost irrelevant. We are almost totally in control of the country.
But the fact is, if Saddam is alive, the rest of his regime will certainly be less likely to surrender. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News at the State Department.
And what about weapons of mass destruction? Was Saddam hoarding them in Baghdad, preparing to make a last stand?
Today, 1st Infantry Division searched this warehouse, finding gas masks they believe may have belonged to the Iraqi army, adding to the fear Saddam may use chemical and biological weapons.
My fear was, the closer that we got to Baghdad, was that there was this trap being laid.
One thing was clear, the road to Baghdad would not be trouble-free.
This is Chip Reed, south of Baghdad.
Roger, we're moving on the compound right now.
It was the most intense firefight of the war so far for the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. All day Friday, they battled hundreds of fiercely determined enemy soldiers.
They didn't surrender, they didn't run, and they could shoot. They could aim and they could hit people. And it was really a real war at that point. It wasn't just rolling over them like a steamroller. It was real fighting.
But how organized were the Saddam loyalists? On their way to Baghdad, coalition forces had discovered huge caches of unused weapons.
At an Iraqi military facility, a massive store of Iraqi weapons, now in American hands.
We'll see what he's got here.
In dozens of buildings and storage rooms, many underground, Marines found thousands upon thousands of boxes of artillery shells and mortars, grenades and missiles. And in this dark and cavernous room, row after row of landmines that could have been used to kill or maim untold numbers of U.S. troops and Iraqi civilians.
It really is amazing, actually, how many weapons had been brought into Iraq and were never even taken out of the wrappers.
Still, no one was minimizing the risk.
Davy's got the shot!
Even as U.S. warplanes continue to pound leadership targets inside the Iraqi capital tonight, U.S. military officials say there are currently no plans to send ground troops into Baghdad and potentially deadly urban combat.
We realize that some of the fighting from a desperate, dying regime could be pretty intense.
The fear the Iraqis could engage in more guerrilla-style warfare or still resort to chemical weapons.
But they have not fought logically from the beginning, and so we in no way discount the possibility they will. They also could use car bombs.
Instead, U.S. troops will keep Baghdad and the Iraqi regime isolated, cut off from the rest of Iraq, and attempt to force a possible coup and eventual surrender. And tonight, U.S. military officials say the next couple of days could be critical. That if the Iraqi regime does not fall quickly, both sides could be in for a lengthy siege of Baghdad.
As the 3rd Infantry made its move into the city's outskirts, cameraman Craig White got caught in a terrifying firefight.
You can never feel by looking at pictures what it's like to be in a battle like that. When large artillery go off, large shells, RPGs go off, it makes your teeth rattle. Fire came from all sides, 360 degrees.
My dad just shot me in the leg.
I was with a medical team where the wounded were brought in. One American soldier managed to shoot back while still on a stretcher. It was some of the hardest fighting I've been in. I've been to Lebanon. I've been in the war in Israel. I've been to Afghanistan. I've been to Central America. This was mechanized fighting. It was modern warfare. Things really blowing up large. I was with a sergeant, nicknamed Black Hawk Bob Gallagher. 2 Purple Hearts. He took shrapnel on a leg. It didn't stop him. While he was being treated, he was still firing back. I believe 20 prisoners were taken. I took pictures of Sergeant Joe Todd and others actually going into a truck full of ammunition as the vehicle next to it was burning, trying to get it out before it blew up. It was down to me giving ammo to people which is something that I never thought I'd have to do before, but I made the choice to do that. Maybe not the correct journalistic choice, but I crossed that line. At that point, it became survival.
Saddam's regime was now battling for survival as well.
Despite some pockets of stubborn resistance, Baghdad is effectively surrounded. With Army infantry and airborne on the west and the south, U.S. Marines are fighting their way around to the east. And anything moving into or out of Baghdad from the north is bombed from the air.
Good evening. Saddam Hussein's 66th birthday is April 28th. That's less than 3 weeks from now. But tonight there's a strong possibility he won't be around to celebrate it. And even if he is, there won't be much to cheer about. As President Bush put it today, Saddam Hussein is losing power finger by finger. And he may have been killed in a massive U.S. bombing strike aimed at him last night.
Bulldozers today dug through the rubble, the aftermath of a U.S. airstrike aimed at Saddam Hussein. Based on U.S. intelligence that Saddam and his son Qusay were in this Baghdad neighborhood yesterday, a B-1 bomber dropped 4 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs on the target. But there's still no proof today Saddam or his son were killed in the attack.
I don't know whether he survived. The only thing I know is he's losing power.
Good evening. 3 weeks ago tonight, the United States made that first surprising strike at a residence of Saddam Hussein in Baghdad, the opening shot in what the Pentagon called Operation Iraqi Freedom. Tonight, after lightning moves and pitched battles in the deserts and cities of Iraq, the long, brutal rule of Saddam Hussein is over.
Thank you. What's up? Thank you.
No Saddam! No Saddam!
Overjoyed Iraqis swarmed into the streets of Baghdad, dancing, celebrating, ripping up images of Saddam Hussein, welcoming U.S. Marines with flowers and kisses. But this was the symbolic image of the day, an act unthinkable until now. Iraqi citizens banging and chipping away at a huge Saddam statue in the heart of the city. With some help from an American military vehicle, the heavy bronze statue came tumbling down, its head dragged on a rope through the streets of the capital. Saddam Hussein, whose regime had terrorized and terrified his people, finally down and out.
Feeling free. Freedom. Bye.
On the morning of April 9th, a remarkable moment in history unfolded on live television. That is at once a pathetic and symbolic representation of Saddam Hussein. It says it all about what is going on. He has been toppled from his pedestal, head down, no dignity, no power, no standing in at least that immediate area of Baghdad, and we can only presume throughout the country as well. One of the great tyrants of the late 20th century has been brought to the ground. And there's the scene the Bush administration has been waiting for a long time. They were assured by Arabists and others there would be dancing in the streets.
And Tom, just as you witnessed at the Berlin Wall with everybody grabbing a chunk when it fell, I'm sure everyone right now is trying to get a piece of Saddam.
A powerful moment in history, April 9th, 2003, the day some say Baghdad fell.
Today, the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force moved in strength through Baghdad. This morning, I went through the U.S. Marine lines out into the streets and found that I was hugged and kissed, that people said, "Go, go, USA! Go, go, George Bush! Yes, Bush! Yes, Bush!" Down, they'd stomp their feet down Saddam Hussein. How are you?
The question had always been, what would it look like? What would the fall of Baghdad look like? And it looked like Paris 1944 in that people were out. They seemed very happy. They were cheering the Marines as they came through.
Iraqis are smashing pictures of Saddam Hussein. Others have been taking advantage of the civil disorder to grab what they can. A British military spokesman said this morning that Baghdad now is, quote, in a position to be liberated, end quote.
But for the coalition forces, it was not yet over.
Iraqis may be dancing in the streets of Baghdad, but officials here at the Pentagon warn there's still plenty of work and fighting to be done. This is what Liberation Day sounded like in western Baghdad. U.S. Army troops still having to fight their way into the city today, ambushed by Iraqi forces well hidden in civilian neighborhoods. Not in large numbers, but small teams of Iraqi military and militia using hit-and-run guerrilla tactics.
There's a lot more fighting that's going to be done. More people are going to be killed, let there be no doubt.
A sniper can suddenly arrive at a location, jump up from behind a wall, a return fire can injure civilians. This is still a very combustive situation. These pictures are extraordinary, they're historic, but this battle, this struggle in Iraq is far from over.
Brian Williams has now made his way to Baghdad under very difficult circumstances, illuminated only by flashlights. Brian, what can you tell us about the fighting that is still going on? Is that evident tonight in the city?
Well, Tom, it is. Flashes on the horizon, one concussion about a minute ago that really shook the air and the ground, swung open a warehouse door not far from here. But a lot of Baghdad, for that matter, a lot of Iraq, is still considered a hot zone.
While a worldwide audience was watching that statue come down, the truth on the ground in Baghdad was markedly different. It looked much more like a war than anything else that had been beamed into our living rooms before that.
This is the real Baghdad, dangerous, nervous, only partially under control. A city of burned out cars, the dead driver's bodies still in them. Weak, nervous smiles from the Iraqis, American soldiers with fingers on the trigger. Looting is everywhere. Anything not bolted down gets carted away.
On the main highway into Baghdad, hundreds of people have been going into factories carrying off anything they can in their arms and in their trucks. The army says it can't deal with looting. It is going to hunt down the enemy, then it will try to restore order. We saw one of Saddam Hussein's palaces that we went into, stripped clean. As we went out, people were taking chandeliers, door frames, window frames. I mean, they were just taking anything that moved.
One day after Saddam's statue toppled to the ground, tensions in Baghdad were still running high. For NBC Chip Reed, it was a day that showed the two sides of Baghdad, the ugly and the welcome.
Tom, we were driving through Baghdad this evening when we approached a Marine checkpoint. Now, when we approached, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye from about 75 yards away. When I looked up, I noticed that all the Marines were lying down. It was a very surreal, very confusing moment. Why would Marines be lying down at a checkpoint? Well, it suddenly became painfully clear why they were. One of them struggled to his feet and shouted, "Suicide bomber, suicide bomber."
His body severed in two and landed on the Marines that he was trying to kill. And you realize then that this war ain't over yet. That's for sure.
You had huge stockpiles of weapons moved into the craziest of places. We went to a children's amusement park, and inside the park, near the swan ride, under the Ferris wheel, you had these big clown images, and under the clown's nose, in the clown's mouth, you had a room full of rocket-propelled grenades and AK-47s.
But 3 days later, on April 13th, some good news. U.S. prisoners of war found alive.
7 American soldiers were recovered safe and in relatively good shape in Iraq this morning after their captors fled from the U.S. Marines near the town of Samarra, north of Baghdad. Now, President Bush has just returned from Camp David. He's been talking to reporters. Let's listen.
Today's a great day for the families, comrades, loved ones of the 7 missing in action who are free. I'm really pleased for all those who've been praying for their safety, that they are safe.
One of the rescued soldiers was Shoshana Johnson, the only remaining female prisoner of war. Her parents share their immense relief with Stone Phillips.
When we sat together and spoke 3 weeks ago, Eunice, you told me that prayers would get you through this and prayers would bring your daughter home.
Oh, yes, I knew it.
Tonight, your prayers have been answered.
They have been answered. The Lord has answered our prayers.
Weeks later, on May 1st, to resounding applause, President Bush declared the major combat had come to an end.
My fellow Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
But Baghdad would remain a city in turmoil. Saddam's fate still uncertain. The hunt for weapons of mass destruction still going on.
I felt that even though the city began to look more like normal, with electricity coming on and lots of cars out, traffic, buses, stores starting to open, people had no sense of what their future was. And their present was just sort of a modern living hell.
When I first got out, we flew from Baghdad on a military transport plane back to Kuwait City. And that night I took a long bath, and somebody had some really bad wine, and I had a glass of wine and a long hot bath. And I suddenly had these pangs of guilt, I mean serious, actual physical pangs of guilt, that I was sitting there in a hot bathtub and my Marines were still out there in the field. And they're still out there.
Absolutely felt guilty leaving them. Not guilty enough to stay, but they're really great young men. I mean, no matter what you think of the war, and whether it's good or bad or ethical or, you know, those young men who never decided the war was good or bad or not. They just came to do their job, and you have to empathize with them.
I was in Kuwait in a first-class hotel, 1 minute, in the trenches with battles going on the next, and then, like a switch, a month later, on a first-class flight back home. And that was a bit spooky. The next morning driving my daughter to school, and the morning before that, I'd been in a trench somewhere.
You can never leave it. It sort of has to leave you. And it takes a while. All the trappings of modern life as we know it become worthless. To walk into a Starbucks and have people agonize over whether it's a latte or a cappuccino or whatever, it's all meaningless. Little things count. A drink of water, a bite of food, shelter, not getting killed by a piece of metal through the air. And it takes a while to decompress from that.
One of the most important lessons I learned, we really do spend a lot of time sweating the small stuff. And, you know, I draw inspiration from some of the Iraqi children I would see. They had so little, and yet they find a way to make happiness. And they would take the wrappers from our MREs, these plastic wrappers, and they make toys out of them. Someone, I think, was trying to make sort of a kite out of the garbage that they're surrounded by. They eked out a childhood despite the little that they had available to them. They suffered greatly, but they seemed happier than most children you see in Toys R Us.
The images that will stay with me forever, certainly the memorial service for the two who were killed. And in particular, the one who I knew so well, Major Kevin Nave, and just images of him, dealing with him. Certainly the image of arriving back in Kuwait City and going into the hotel suite where our office was and where David Bloom was always sitting at that desk pounding away on the computer. And that was really the first moment that it hit me, that he's really gone.
The death of David put everything in perspective for me. It showed me, it might sound corny, but how sacred life is, and how literally at a moment's notice everything can be taken away from you. I remember I was on a plane back to the US the day Baghdad fell, and how insignificant that seemed in comparison to the monumental grief I'm sure his family was going through at that time.
It's very hard to say that we were successful in what we did covering this war, because David didn't come home with us. It's hollow, and it'll always be hollow for me because David didn't enjoy it with us. You know, David didn't come home to finish the conversation that we had around the table in Kuwait before the war began.
We lost some wonderful journalists, but what an astounding success the program was. To quote the great H.R. Haldeman, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. There's going to be an embed with every American unit for every armed conflict in this nation from now on. If there isn't, that's when people need to worry. Embeds, the noun, the verb, the entity is here to stay.
I think anybody who wonders about the relationship between the media and the Army and the embed process should understand we are able to report more than we ever could. And we're really able to see what they do, and we're able to report it without restriction. And it's not a perfect process. You still need to go off and talk to the other side. You need to have other reporters in the area of conflict. But it is an incredible experience.
Iraq was America's first war of the 21st century, and while it was not a conflict on a scale with World War II, Korea, or Vietnam, it does occupy a special place, for it was probably the most widely televised event in history. For 3 intense weeks, television screens around the world were filled with live or slightly delayed images of the rush to Baghdad, the unexpected resistance along the way, the disquieting episodes when combatants and innocents alike were killed or wounded.
A division is a huge organization.
Military analysts and political commentators provided perspective and critical observations about the nature of the fighting, the strategic decisions, the geopolitical implications as the armored columns rolled through the desert and the airstrikes hammered key targets in the Iraqi capital. Suddenly, the major combat was over. The difficult process of rebuilding Iraq, searching for weapons of mass destruction, and trying to root out key figures in the Saddam regime got underway in a largely lawless environment.
Okay, we've just had shots fired.
Iraq was full of surprises, large and small. The military consequences were not nearly as catastrophic as some critics had predicted, but the outcome was not nearly as tidy as the administration and its supporters had promised. Iraq was another reminder of the enduring truths of warfare. In the early stages, we were witness to the fog of combat, when the early tactics were disrupted by that tenacious militia group. Once that was over, the other truth took hold. War is not just about winning. It is also about knowing when to arrive and how to leave.
Break us in!
Here we go.
Break us in!